Hello, and welcome back to the 12th instalment of my failed franchises series. In this series, I look at whether defunct rail franchises should be deemed as failed, whether this be their contract being stripped from them, or their franchise simply being deemed poor by the public and industry. In this video, I'll look at the first of the East Coast Mainline's privatised operators, GNER, and why they ended their operations early due to parent company collapse. But can they truly be classified as a failed franchise? That's what I'll discuss in today's video. Do ensure you like and subscribe so you don't miss the other episodes of this East Coast Mainline operator mini-series. First, let's look at the formation of GNER as the first operator of the historic East Coast Mainline, running from King's Cross in London up towards Scotland via Doncaster, Leeds and Newcastle, a hugely important route in connecting Great Britain. Under the privatisation of British Rail, the Intercity East Coast franchise was created to act as the express operator along the East Coast Mainline, incorporating all the nearly brand new Intercity 225 sets and some older Intercity 125 HST sets, running on a newly rejuvenated and electrified East Coast Mainline. As with all the other franchises, bidding was used to produce a winner, with a certain Bermuda-based company called Sea Containers being one of these bidders on the franchise. By March 1996, it was announced that Sea Containers had won the bid for the running of the Intercity East Coast franchise for 7 years under their new subsidy of GNER. The name itself was important, with Great North Eastern Railway proving as a throwback to the golden age of rail travel under the former London North Eastern Railway Company before nationalisation. With its incredible regal-like branding and livery choices, GNER was attempting to bring back the best rail travel possible, and it would give it a good shot. GNER's franchise would begin on the 28th of April 1996 and would operate the length of the East Coast Mainline. GNER operated regular services from King's Cross towards Leeds, York, Newcastle, Edinburgh and Glasgow, via stations such as Peterborough and Doncaster. GNER also ran less frequent minor routes from London towards Hull, Bradford, Skipton, Harrogate, Aberdeen and Inverness, with these routes usually being operated just once or twice a day. As for rolling stock, GNER would inherit all of the Intercity 225 sets, as well as 14 Class 43s, along with 56 Mark III coaches for the non-electrified services. The franchise itself, as aforementioned, was to last for 7 years, with the franchise including several requirements, including maintaining the same timetable operated in 1995 for at least 2 years, with it increasing after this, the refurbishment of all existing stock, including providing a buffet and trolley service on all trains, with some receiving on-board restaurants. The franchise also promised for better security at stations, improved access for all, and better car parking facilities. Overall, GNER promised to bring back the golden age of steam travel and pledged huge change to the East Coast Mainline. Just several months into the franchise beginning, the Sea Containers chairman, James Sherwood, announced plans for GNER to acquire several new-build tilting trains, which travelled at 140 miles an hour, and could reduce times from London to Edinburgh to 3.5 hours. Despite Sea Containers suggesting that they had placed an order in October 1997, with the units arriving by 1999, no such trains were ever delivered, with skeptics somewhat confused as to why the chairman would promise something that couldn't and wasn't delivered. Despite this, the first few years of GNER was rather successful, with GNER running the fastest service in Britain, averaging 112 miles an hour from London to York. Passengers were also satisfied with the refurbishments to GNER's units, with their customer service usually claiming to be the best from any operator, with there being a noticeable improvement in catering on onboard services. So far for GNER, things looked good, and things got better going into 1997, where, during a period of poor reliability shown by the Class 91s, GNER purchased the one prototype, Class 89 electric locomotive, to be used for services to Leeds and Bradford. Although costing £100,000 to renovate to mainline standards, the locomotive helped GNER in its lack of rolling stock, increasing the overall GNER punctuality and showing how train companies could be proactive in resolving issues that they faced. Although a derailment in 1998 did lead to the entire GNER 225 fleet being temporarily withdrawn to check all the wheels on the sets, this only affected GNER for a matter of days, and the service was soon back to normal. Despite GNER's overall great service prior to the turn of the century, this would not last. Sadly, in October 2000, the Hatfield crash occurred, affecting a GNER 225 set. The crash, occurring in Hatfield, Hertfordshire, was, as with all post-privatisation crashes in the rail track era, something that should never have happened and once again highlighted just how bad rail track were for passenger safety. 4 passengers died at the accident, with 70 injured, on the 225 set, which derailed at 115 miles an hour due to a fracture in the left handrail. All the deaths occurred in the restaurant coach, which overturned into an overhead line gantry. Sadly for GNER, things wouldn't get better in 2001. Just months after Hatfield, in February, a Land Rover trailing another car strayed off the M62 onto the East Coast Mainline, becoming stuck, and was hit by a GNER Intercity 225, coincidentally the same Class 91 locomotive that was involved in the Hatfield crash months prior. This crash was sadly far worse, with the front DVT of the GNER 225 set deflecting onto a nearby sidings and colliding head-on with a Class 66 Freightliner train, causing catastrophic damage to the 9 Mark IV coaches and leading to 10 deaths, including both train drivers involved and 2 other GNER staff members. The overall crash was thought to have a closing speed of 142 miles an hour, one of the fastest in British history. Although this crash was deemed to be the Land Rover driver's fault, not the railway or rail track, this did not change the overall effect of the 2 crashes. Altogether, the crashes led to huge decreases in passenger numbers on GNER services due to the fear created by the 2 crashes. This was not helped by the 9/11 terror attacks in New York in September of that year. These tragic events led to GNER's revenue being dropped by 21% and severely affecting the operations of the operator, not least due to temporary safety speed restrictions imposed by Railtrack, increasing journey times. Whilst all this was ongoing, GNER's original 7-year contract was nearing its end, and many questioned what the next franchise could bring in improvements to the East Coast Mainline. Sea Containers were once again shortlisted for the next Intercity East Coast franchise, along with Virgin and Stagecoach, when GNER's original contract ended. One idea was tainted by Sea Containers for the new contract to include a new fleet of 25 advanced tilting trains, similar to the Virgin Trains Class 390s, with some being diesel and others being electric. Virgin proposed similar plans, which would see a new TGV-like fleet introduced, running on new high-speed tracks from Peterborough and Newcastle, with the plans costing £5 billion. The Strategic Rail Authority, SRA, now had to choose between the 2 huge bids, and eventually chose neither, scrapping the bidding contest and handing GNER a franchise extension in 2001 until April 2005. This is still seen as a pretty poor decision to this day, as it scrapped the proposals by Sea Containers and Virgin, which would have seen the East Coast Mainline completely revitalised, with not much changing until nearly 20 years later, when the new IET trains were introduced with LNER. Despite the new franchise improvements effectively being shelved, GNER did lease 5 Class 373 regional Eurostar sets from Eurostar, costing £50 million, which included 6 rescue locomotives. The Eurostar units operated between London, York and Leeds, but could only reach 110 miles an hour on the East Coast Mainline due to overhead line interference, with gauging requirements limiting the use of the units north of York. This was intertwined with 11 additional London to Leeds services, with a £16 million investment in the infrastructure and £10 million in station improvements. Also, in April 2003, GNER improved its delay repay claims, with 45-minute delays leading to a 50% refund, later reduced to 30 minutes. This also included season ticket holders for the first time ever. As well as this, HST sets would be lengthened, and the Intercity 225 sets would finish their refurbishment programme by April 2005. GNER also promised improvements to reliability, with it stating that it wanted to meet an 81% on-time score by 2003, with this rising to 83% by April 2004. This would be met by a £20 million reliability improvement package on the Class 91 locomotives. Overall then, the new franchise extension for GNER did bring new stock and improvements worth around £100 million. By 2004, the franchise was once again up for rebidding, and this time the SRA allowed bidding to take place. Sea Containers, First Group, DSB, the Danish State Railways, and a joint consortium with Deutsche Bahn, Stagecoach and Virgin. Eventually, in March 2005, GNER were re-awarded the East Coast Mainline franchise for 10 years. In the terms of the franchise, GNER would pay the government £1.3 billion over the 10 years, a huge change from the subsidies that were given to GNER before the new contract. GNER assumed that passengers would rise 30% over those 10 years, reaching 20 million by 2015, a pretty bold target to say the least. What didn't help with meeting this target was the fact that there would be no replacements for the ageing Intercity 225 sets, which would have to have a load factor increase of 65% full on all services. The only increase in fleet that GNER were given were an extra 3 HST sets, with the whole HST fleet subsequently being refurbished, costing £75 million altogether. In the new franchise, GNER would also increase its Leeds to London services, where passengers had rose 30% in 2 years, with there now being 53 services a day, up from the 37 in 1996. GNER also promised £25 million on station modernisation, but GNER suggested the franchise had to be run effectively to be profitable, with unions fearing that this would mean job cuts, or ticket price rises, or both. Customers also feared that the service would be worse overall and would not be the trademark high-quality customer service which GNER was known to strive for. Despite many believing GNER was in a good position at the start of the new contract, this was quickly proven wrong. Customer complaints rose, and the 7/7 bombings in 2005 led to another period of passenger decline, at a time when GNER's survival rested upon passenger growth. As well as this, the newly founded Network Rail and their increase in infrastructural performance meant that GNER received less payments from the company, leading to more financial worries. GNER also faced competition from open access operators such as Hull Trains and the newly founded Grand Central. The fact Grand Central were able to call it York led to substantial passenger and financial decreases for GNER on London to York routes. GNER called the decision unlawful and put forward several lawsuits against the company, none of which was successful. Despite the competition, GNER pressed on with their operations until 2006, in October, when disaster struck. Parent company Sea Containers had wound up £350 million of debt in its other businesses, and has thus filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy on the 16th of October 2006. Although GNER was a separate division, there would be some effect from the company's collapse. Indeed, on the 15th of December 2006, the Department for Transport confirmed that GNER would be forced to surrender its franchise due to the fact that GNER would not be on course to deliver its £1.3 billion in repayments. Robert Mackenzie, CEO of Sea Containers, suggested that GNER did seek a renegotiation to limit repayments, but this was not granted, with revenue not increasing to the 10% in 2005 that was needed to fully repay the franchise obligation payment. Unions supported the move, with the fact that GNER was planning to cut jobs being the main reason for the lack of support. With GNER's collapse, the focus was, what next? Eventually, the SRA decided to rebid for the franchise, which was given to National Express East Coast, an operator I will study later in this mini-series. In the meantime, we should conclude with GNER. Overall, can GNER be classified as a failed franchise? Well, legally, yes. Their contract was nulled and thus they were no longer a franchise due to their performance. But, looking at the reasons for their collapse, it would be unfair to blame GNER themselves. Firstly, the franchise obligations were far too optimistic in my opinion. A 30% passenger increase in 10 years was somewhat unachievable, especially after the 7/7 bombings, with the decision from the government to not renegotiate the contract being the main reason for GNER's failure. The Sea Containers collapse certainly did not help, with the cash stream from parent company not being available to bail GNER out. However, despite GNER's impressive customer service, they were planning staffing cuts, which would have put the franchise into more mess. However, what do you think? Am I being too lenient on GNER, or did they deserve their contract to be stripped from them? Well, let me know in the comments below. Do consider liking, subscribing and joining the channel. Special thanks to my first class member, Callum Martyn Bell, and my business zone members, Andrew Bowen, Anthony Harris, Craig Mitchell 43 and Smudgy Cat. Also thank you to Deva Rooney for his donations and membership. Thanks so much for watching. Check out my Twitter, Discord and Instagram in the links below. Check out my full Failed Franchises series, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.